Samuel Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he loaded the last bundle of hay onto his wagon. The Montana sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. His small farm sat at the edge of the wilderness, miles away from the nearest town. Most folks thought he was crazy for settling so far from civilization, but Samuel loved the peace and quiet. As he prepared to head back to his barn, he heard something that made him stop. A soft whimpering sound was coming from the tall grass near the creek. Samuel grabbed his rifle from the wagon, not knowing what to expect. Bears were common in these parts, and a wounded animal could be dangerous. He pushed through the grass carefully, following the sound. What he found made him lower his weapon immediately. A young Indigenous girl, no more than 15 years old, lay unconscious by the water's edge. Her clothes were torn and bloodied, and a deep gash ran across her forehead. Her breathing was shallow and weak. Samuel had heard the stories from other settlers about conflicts with the local tribes. But looking at this injured child, all he could think about was helping her. He gently lifted her in his arms, surprised by how light she was. Her skin was burning with fever, and he knew she needed medical attention immediately. The nearest doctor was 2 days' ride away in town, but Samuel didn't think she would survive the journey. His wife Martha had passed away 3 years ago from pneumonia, but she had taught him some basic healing skills before she died. He would have to try to help the girl himself. Samuel carried her to his small farmhouse and laid her on his bed. He cleaned her wounds with warm water and applied the herbal remedies Martha had shown him. The girl's fever was high, and she mumbled words in a language he didn't understand. Sometimes she would cry out as if she was having nightmares. For 3 days, Samuel barely left her side. He spooned broth into her mouth when she was awake enough to swallow. He changed her bandages and kept cool cloths on her forehead to bring down the fever. His farm work went undone, but he didn't care. This girl's life was more important than his crops. On the 4th morning, her eyes finally opened and stayed open. She looked around the unfamiliar room with fear and confusion. When she saw Samuel sitting in the chair beside the bed, she tried to sit up quickly but winced in pain from her injuries. Samuel raised his hands to show he meant no harm. He spoke slowly and gently, even though he knew she probably couldn't understand English. He brought her water and some bread, showing her through gestures that he was trying to help. The girl watched him carefully, still afraid, but beginning to realize that this white man had saved her life. Her name was Ayana, which meant eternal blossom in her language. She was from the Blackfoot tribe, and she had been gathering berries near the river when she was attacked by 3 white men who were passing through. They had hurt her badly and left her for dead by the creek. She had crawled as far as she could before collapsing. Through simple gestures and drawings in the dirt, Ayana managed to tell Samuel what had happened to her. His face grew dark with anger when he understood. He had always tried to be fair and respectful to the Indigenous people he occasionally encountered, unlike many of the other settlers who saw them as enemies. Samuel knew he was taking a big risk by helping her. If other settlers found out, they might think he was betraying his own kind. If her tribe found out a white man had her, they might think he was the one who hurt her. But looking at this brave young girl who had survived such terrible treatment, he knew he had made the right choice. As Ayana grew stronger, she began to help around the farm. She showed Samuel which wild plants were good for eating and healing. She taught him how to track animals and read signs in nature that he had never noticed before. In return, he shared his food and shelter, and slowly began teaching her some English words. They developed a friendship based on mutual respect and kindness. Samuel learned that Ayana's father was an important chief in her tribe, and her brother was a respected warrior. She had been raised to be strong and independent, which explained how she had survived her ordeal. But Samuel didn't know that Ayana's disappearance had not gone unnoticed. Her family had been searching for her for days, following every trail and asking every scout for information. They had found the place by the creek where she was attacked, and they had found tracks leading toward Samuel's farm. The tribal council was meeting to decide what to do. Some wanted to attack immediately, assuming that white settlers had taken their chief's daughter. Others wanted to scout first and learn more about the situation. But one thing was certain: they would not rest until they found Ayana and brought her home safely. Samuel had no idea that dozens of warriors were already moving through the forest toward his farm, or that his act of kindness was about to be tested in ways he could never have imagined. 2 weeks had passed since Samuel found Ayanna by the creek. The young girl's strength had returned, and the deep gash on her forehead was healing well, though it would leave a permanent scar. She moved around the farm with quiet grace, helping with daily tasks and sharing her knowledge of the wilderness. Samuel had grown fond of her company. After 3 years of lonely evenings since Martha's death, it felt good to have someone to share meals with again. Ayanna was quick to learn English words, and she taught him phrases in her own language. They communicated through a mixture of both languages, hand gestures, and drawings. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace after finishing their simple dinner, Ayanna grew serious. She had been thinking about her family and knew they must be worried sick about her. Using the English words she had learned, mixed with her native language and gestures, she tried to explain to Samuel that she needed to return to her people. Samuel understood her concern, but he was worried about her safety. The men who had attacked her might still be in the area, and he wasn't sure how her tribe would react if they found her with a white settler. He had heard stories of raids and conflicts, and he feared for both their lives. Ayanna could see the worry in Samuel's eyes. She drew pictures in the dirt to show him that her father was a peaceful chief who valued justice over revenge. She explained that her people would understand once they learned how Samuel had saved her life. But she also knew that the longer she stayed away, the more dangerous the situation could become. That night, Samuel lay awake thinking about what to do. He cared about Ayanna's safety, but he also knew she was right about needing to return to her family. He decided that in the morning, he would help her get back to her tribe safely. He would ride with her part of the way and make sure she wasn't in danger. But they wouldn't get the chance to make that journey on their own terms. Long Wolf, Ayanna's older brother, had been leading the search party for 2 weeks. He was one of the finest trackers in their tribe, and he had followed every possible trail looking for his sister. The other warriors were growing impatient, and some were talking about raiding white settlements until they found her. Long Wolf had finally picked up a trail that led toward the isolated farm. His scouts had reported seeing smoke from a chimney and signs of 2 people living there. One set of tracks was clearly from a white man's boots, but the other tracks were harder to identify. They could have been made by his sister, but he couldn't be certain. The war party had been watching Samuel's farm from the forest for 3 days, trying to understand the situation. They had seen a young Indigenous woman working around the property, but from a distance they couldn't tell if it was Ayanna or if she was there willingly. Some of the younger warriors wanted to attack immediately. They were angry about other recent conflicts with white settlers and assumed the worst. But Long Wolf was more cautious. Something about the scene didn't seem right for a kidnapping. The woman appeared to move freely, and there was no sign of chains or guards. Chief Running Bear, Ayanna's father, had sent word that he was coming with additional warriors. The message was clear. They would bring Ayanna home one way or another. If she had been harmed, there would be consequences. If she was being held against her will, they would rescue her. But if she was safe and the white man had helped her, they would honor that kindness. On the 3rd night of watching, one of the scouts crept closer to the farmhouse. Through the window, he saw something that made him hurry back to Long Wolf with surprising news. The young woman was definitely Ayanna, and she appeared to be unharmed. More importantly, she was teaching the white man words in their language, and both of them were laughing. This news confused the war party. If Ayanna was safe and happy, why hadn't she come home? Was she being held by some kind of magic or trickery? Or had she chosen to stay with this white settler? The situation was more complicated than they had expected. Long Wolf decided they needed to get closer to understand what was really happening. He selected his best warriors to surround the farm before dawn. They would watch and wait for the right moment to make contact. If Ayanna was truly safe, they would approach peacefully. If she was in danger, they would be ready to fight. As the war party moved into position around Samuel's farm, none of them knew that Ayanna had already been planning to return home. They didn't know about the terrible attack she had survived or how Samuel had nursed her back to health with such gentle care. All they knew was that their chief's daughter had been missing for weeks, and now they had found her with a white stranger. The stage was set for a confrontation that could end in bloodshed or understanding, depending on how the next few hours unfolded. Samuel and Ayanna slept peacefully in the farmhouse, unaware that they were completely surrounded by armed warriors who were trying to decide their fate. In just a few hours, The sun would rise and Samuel would step outside his barn to begin his morning chores. When he did, he would find himself face to face with more Indigenous warriors than he had ever seen in his life, all of them waiting to learn the truth about what had happened to their chief's beloved daughter. Samuel woke before sunrise as he did every morning. The rooster hadn't even started crowing yet, but years of farm life had trained his body to wake with the coming dawn. He stretched and quietly got dressed, trying not to wake Ayana, who was sleeping on a makeshift bed he had prepared for her in the main room. He stepped outside into the cool morning air and walked toward the barn to begin his daily chores. The horses needed feeding and he wanted to milk the cow before the day got too warm. As he rounded the corner of the barn, he stopped so suddenly that he nearly fell backward. Standing in a perfect line in front of his barn were more Indigenous warriors than he had ever seen in one place. Their faces were painted for war, and they held weapons in their hands. Feathers decorated their hair, and their eyes watched him with intense focus. Samuel's heart hammered in his chest as he tried to count them. 50, 70, maybe 100 warriors spread across his property. At the center of the group stood a tall man with commanding presence. His headdress marked him as a chief, and the way the other warriors positioned themselves around him showed great respect. This had to be Ayana's father, Chief Running Bear. Beside him stood a younger man who looked remarkably like Ayana, probably her brother. Samuel slowly raised his hands to show he carried no weapons. His rifle was still inside the house, but even if he could reach it, it would be useless against so many warriors. His mouth went dry as he tried to think of what to say or do. For long moments, nobody moved or spoke. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Samuel could see some of the younger warriors gripping their weapons tighter, waiting for a signal from their chief. One wrong move could start a battle that would end with his death. Then the door of the farmhouse opened and Ayana stepped outside. She had heard voices and come to investigate. When she saw the war party assembled in front of the barn, her eyes went wide with shock and then filled with joy. She recognized her father and brother immediately. Ayana called out in her native language, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. She said her father's name and her brother's name, and then she began speaking rapidly, gesturing toward Samuel. The warriors' grip on their weapons loosened slightly as they heard her voice, confirming that she was alive and well. Chief Running Bear stepped forward, his weathered face showing both relief and confusion. He spoke to his daughter in their language, asking questions that Samuel couldn't understand. Ayana answered him, occasionally pointing to Samuel and making gestures that seemed to indicate healing and kindness. Long Wolf, Ayana's brother, remained suspicious. He spoke sharply to his sister, and Samuel could tell from his tone that he was demanding answers. Why had she been gone so long? Why hadn't she tried to return home? Why was she with this white stranger? Ayana's response was long and emotional. She pointed to the scar on her forehead, then gestured toward the creek where Samuel had found her. She acted out parts of her story: the attack, her injuries, Samuel finding her and caring for her. When she finished speaking, several of the warriors looked at Samuel with different expressions. Chief Running Bear approached Samuel slowly, studying his face carefully. The chief was a man who had lived through many conflicts and had learned to read people's intentions. He looked into Samuel's eyes, searching for signs of deception or cruelty. What he saw there was fear, yes, but also honesty and genuine concern for his daughter's well-being. Through Ayana translating, Chief Running Bear asked Samuel to tell his version of what had happened. Samuel spoke slowly and clearly, with Ayana translating his words. He described finding her injured by the creek, caring for her wounds, and the friendship they had developed over the past 2 weeks. When Samuel mentioned the 3 white men who had attacked Ayana, angry murmurs spread through the war party. Several warriors spoke angrily among themselves. Violence against women was considered deeply dishonorable by their culture, and the fact that white men had hurt the chief's daughter while she was peacefully gathering berries made their blood boil. But their anger wasn't directed at Samuel. As Ayana continued to translate his story, it became clear to everyone present that this white settler had saved their chief's daughter's life. He had risked his own safety to help a stranger, asking for nothing in return. Long Wolf stepped forward and spoke directly to Samuel, with Ayana translating. He thanked Samuel for saving his sister's life and asked what the white man wanted as payment for his kindness. In their culture, such a debt of gratitude was taken very seriously. Samuel was surprised by the question. He hadn't helped Ayanna expecting any reward. He simply told them that seeing her healthy and reunited with her family was payment enough. This answer seemed to surprise and impress the warriors even more. Chief Running Bear conferred quietly with his war council, discussing what should be done. Some suggested that Samuel should be adopted into their tribe as an honorary member. Others proposed giving him gifts of horses or furs. A few thought they should simply leave him in peace and spread word among all the tribes that this particular white man was under their protection. While the council talked, Ayanna stood beside Samuel, translating bits of their conversation. She could see that he was still nervous, though the immediate danger had passed. The war party was no longer threatening him, but the situation was far from over. The sun climbed higher in the sky as the discussions continued. Samuel realized that this encounter would change his life forever, one way or another. He had helped one person in need, and now he found himself at the center of a moment that could affect relationships between settlers and indigenous peoples for years to come. Chief Running Bear finished his discussion with the War Council and walked toward Samuel with slow, deliberate steps. The other warriors watched respectfully as their leader prepared to speak. Ayanna moved closer to Samuel, ready to translate whatever her father was about to say. The chief began speaking in a deep, resonant voice that carried the weight of authority and wisdom. Ayanna translated his words carefully. Chief Running Bear was saying that Samuel had done something extraordinary by saving his daughter's life. In their culture, such an act created a sacred bond between families that could never be broken. Samuel listened intently as Ayanna continued translating. The chief explained that the Blackfoot people believed in honoring those who showed true kindness, regardless of their race or background. Samuel had proven himself to be a man of good heart, and that meant something important to their tribe. But Chief Running Bear also had concerns that he needed to address. He asked Samuel if he understood the dangerous position he was now in. Word would spread among both indigenous peoples and white settlers about what had happened here today. Some people on both sides would not understand or approve of the friendship that had developed. Samuel nodded, acknowledging that he had already thought about these challenges. He told the chief through Ayanna's translation that he was prepared to face whatever consequences came from doing what he believed was right. He had lost his wife to illness and had no children, so he had fewer fears about his own safety than most men would. This answer impressed Chief Running Bear even more. He could see that Samuel was not just kind but also brave and principled. These were qualities that the chief valued highly in any person, whether they were indigenous or white. Long Wolf stepped forward and added his own thoughts to the conversation. He said that Samuel had not only saved Ayanna's life but had also prevented a war. If she had died from her injuries or if they had never found her, the young warriors would have demanded revenge against all white settlers in the area. Samuel's kindness had stopped a cycle of violence before it could begin. Chief Running Bear nodded at his son's wisdom and then made an announcement that surprised everyone, including his own warriors. He declared that Samuel Morrison was now under the official protection of the Blackfoot Nation. Any person, indigenous or white, who harmed Samuel would answer to Chief Running Bear personally, but the chief wasn't finished. He had a proposal that would solve several problems at once. He offered to formalize the friendship between Samuel and their tribe through an adoption ceremony. Samuel would become an honorary member of their people, with all the rights and protections that came with such status. This was an extraordinary offer that was rarely made to outsiders. Ayanna's eyes lit up with excitement as she translated her father's words. She had grown to care for Samuel like family over the past 2 weeks, and the idea of making that bond official filled her with joy. Samuel was overwhelmed by the generosity of the offer, but he also understood the serious implications. Becoming an honorary member of the Blackfoot tribe would change his entire life. He would be welcomed in their villages and hunting grounds, but he might also be seen as a traitor by other white settlers. Chief Running Bear seemed to read Samuel's thoughts. He explained that the adoption would not require Samuel to give up his farm or his way of life. He could continue living as he always had, but he would also have a place among the Blackfoot people whenever he chose to visit. More importantly, he would serve as a bridge between their two worlds. The chief had a vision of peace between their peoples, but he knew it could only happen through understanding and trust. Samuel had already proven that white people and indigenous people could live together with mutual respect. Perhaps he could help others learn the same lesson. Samuel looked around at the 100 warriors who had surrounded his farm at dawn. Their expressions had changed completely from when he first saw them. Where there had been suspicion and potential hostility, he now saw respect and even friendship. Some of the younger warriors were smiling at him, impressed by his courage and character. After thinking carefully, Samuel accepted Chief Running Bear's offer. He said he would be honored to be adopted into the Blackfoot tribe and to help build understanding between their peoples. The decision felt right in his heart, even though he knew it would bring challenges. The chief smiled broadly at Samuel's acceptance. He announced that they would hold the adoption ceremony immediately, while all the warriors were present to witness it. This would ensure that word of Samuel's new status spread quickly throughout all the Blackfoot bands. Ayanna was chosen to stand beside Samuel during the ceremony, representing the bond that had brought them all together. As her father began the traditional words of adoption, she whispered translations to Samuel so he could understand the sacred promises being made. The ceremony was simple, but powerful. Chief Running Bear spoke about the meaning of family, the importance of protecting those who showed kindness, and the hope for peace between all peoples. He gave Samuel a new name in the Blackfoot language that meant healer of hearts, honoring both his care for Ayanna and his potential to help heal the wounds between their communities. When the ceremony concluded, each warrior came forward to touch Samuel's shoulder in a gesture of acceptance and brotherhood. Some of the older warriors shared brief stories of their own encounters with white settlers, both good and bad. They wanted Samuel to understand the history and complexity of the relationships between their peoples. As the sun reached its highest point in the sky, Chief Running Bear prepared to lead his warriors back to their village. But this would not be a simple departure. The events of this morning had created new possibilities and new responsibilities for everyone involved. Before leaving, Chief Running Bear had one more important matter to discuss with Samuel. Through Ayanna's translation, he explained that the 3 white men who had attacked his daughter were still somewhere in the territory. They could not be allowed to hurt anyone else, indigenous or white. The chief wanted to know if Samuel would help them track down these criminals. Samuel agreed immediately. The thought of those men attacking other innocent people made his blood boil with anger. He knew the local area better than most, and his knowledge combined with the warriors' tracking skills would give them the best chance of finding the attackers. Long Wolf volunteered to lead a hunting party to track the 3 men. He selected 20 of his best warriors to accompany him, and he asked Samuel to join them as a guide. Ayanna insisted on coming too, despite her father's concerns for her safety. She argued that she was the only one who could identify the attackers with certainty. The hunting party set out immediately, following the trail that Long Wolf's scouts had discovered near the creek where Ayanna was found. The tracks were 2 weeks old, but the experienced warriors could still read the signs that others would miss. They found evidence of a camp where the men had stayed for several days after the attack. Samuel studied the campsite carefully and noticed something the others had missed. There were bottle fragments scattered around the area, indicating the men had been drinking heavily. He also found scraps of paper that appeared to be from supply lists, suggesting they were not just passing through but were planning to stay in the area for a while. Following the trail, the hunting party traveled for 3 days through rough terrain. They moved carefully, knowing that the 3 men might be armed and dangerous. Along the way, they found more evidence of the attackers' presence, more campsites, discarded food containers, and even some stolen items that Long Wolf recognized as belonging to other tribal members. It became clear that these 3 men had been terrorizing the area for weeks, stealing from both indigenous peoples and white settlers. They had attacked Ayanna during what was probably just one of many crimes they had committed. This made everyone in the hunting party even more determined to bring them to justice. On the 3rd evening, they finally caught up with their quarry. The 3 attackers had made camp in a small valley, thinking they were safe from pursuit. They had grown careless and confident, not expecting anyone to follow them so far or so persistently. Long Wolf positioned his warriors around the valley while Samuel and Ayanna watched from a hidden spot above the camp. When Ayanna saw the 3 men sitting around their campfire, her whole body tensed with remembered fear and anger. These were definitely the men who had hurt her so badly. Samuel could see that Ayanna was struggling with painful memories, and he offered to stay with her while the warriors handled the capture. But she shook her head firmly. She wanted to face her attackers and see justice done. Her courage impressed Samuel once again. The warriors moved in silently as the three men slept. The capture was swift and efficient. The attackers woke up surrounded by armed Blackfoot warriors with no chance of escape. Their faces showed terror when they realized who had found them. Long Wolf spoke to the prisoners in English, which he had learned during trading expeditions. He accused them of attacking his sister and stealing from his people. The three men tried to deny everything at first, but when Ayanna stepped into the light of their campfire and they saw her face, their guilt was obvious. Samuel stepped forward and told the attackers that he had found Ayanna nearly dead from the wounds they had inflicted. He described how close she had come to dying and how her family had spent weeks searching for her. The three men looked ashamed and frightened as they realized the consequences of their actions. According to Blackfoot law, crimes like these were punishable by death. But Chief Running Bear had given Long Wolf specific instructions about how to handle the situation. The tribe wanted justice, but they also wanted to show that they could be fair and reasonable in their dealings with white people. Long Wolf announced that the three attackers would be taken to the nearest white settlement and turned over to the territorial authorities. This would demonstrate that the Blackfoot people respected white laws and wanted to work within the legal system when possible. It would also ensure that other white settlers heard about what had happened and understood that crimes against Indigenous people would not be tolerated. The decision surprised everyone, including Samuel. He had expected the warriors to execute the attackers immediately, according to their own laws. Instead, they were choosing a path that showed remarkable restraint and wisdom. During the journey back to the settlement, Samuel had time to talk with Long Wolf about his people's approach to justice. Long Wolf explained that his father believed the old ways of constant warfare and revenge were no longer working. The world was changing, and the Blackfoot needed to find new ways to protect their people while also building better relationships with their neighbors. This conversation helped Samuel understand why Chief Running Bear had been so interested in adopting him into the tribe. The chief was looking for people who could help bridge the gap between two very different cultures. Samuel's act of kindness toward Ayanna had proven that such cooperation was possible. When they reached the settlement and turned the three attackers over to the sheriff, word of what had happened spread quickly. Some white settlers were amazed that Indigenous warriors had captured criminals and brought them to white authorities instead of taking revenge themselves. Others were angry that a white man had been adopted into an Indigenous tribe. Samuel realized that his new status as an honorary Blackfoot member was going to create both opportunities and challenges he hadn't fully anticipated. But as he watched Ayanna reunite with her family and saw the respect in the warrior's eyes, he knew he had made the right choice. 6 months after the dramatic morning when 100 warriors had surrounded his barn, Samuel's life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. His small farm had become an unofficial meeting place between white settlers and members of the Blackfoot tribe. People from both communities would stop by to trade goods, share information, and sometimes just to talk. The adoption ceremony had given Samuel a unique position that few people in the territory possessed. White settlers trusted him because he was one of them, while the Blackfoot people respected him because Chief Running Bear had declared him family. This trust from both sides allowed him to serve as a mediator when conflicts arose. Ayanna visited regularly, usually bringing other young people from her tribe who were curious about white customs and technology. In return, Samuel taught them about farming techniques, reading and writing, and how to deal with white traders fairly. These informal education sessions were helping to build understanding between the communities. The friendship between Samuel and Ayanna had grown even stronger over the months. She had become like the daughter he never had, and he had become like a second father to her. Their bond was noticed and appreciated by both communities as an example of what was possible when people approached each other with open hearts. Not everyone approved of the new arrangements, however. Some white settlers complained that Samuel was going native and betraying his own people. A few had even suggested that he was a traitor who couldn't be trusted. These criticisms hurt, but Samuel remained committed to his role as a bridge between the two worlds. Similarly, some members of the Blackfoot tribe questioned whether it was wise to trust any white person so completely. They pointed to the long history of broken promises and violence as evidence that cooperation was impossible. But Chief Running Bear continued to support the friendship, believing it represented hope for the future. The real test of Samuel's new position came when a large group of new settlers arrived in the territory. These newcomers had heard stories about Indian troubles and came prepared for conflict. They established their settlement closer to Blackfoot hunting grounds than previous groups had dared, and tensions began rising immediately. When cattle from the new settlement wandered onto traditional Blackfoot hunting grounds and scared away the game, angry young warriors wanted to retaliate by driving off the livestock. The situation could have escalated into serious violence, but both sides agreed to let Samuel mediate the dispute. Samuel spent days traveling between the new settlement and the Blackfoot village, listening to both sides and helping them understand each other's perspectives. The settlers learned that the land they thought was empty was actually crucial hunting territory that the tribe depended on for survival. The Blackfoot learned that the settlers had traveled hundreds of miles and had families depending on them to establish successful farms. Through patient negotiation, Samuel helped both groups reach a compromise. The settlers agreed to keep their cattle fenced and to avoid the most important hunting areas during certain seasons. In return, the Blackfoot agreed to help the settlers learn which areas were safe for expansion and which plants and animals in the region could be useful. The successful resolution of this conflict enhanced Samuel's reputation as a peacemaker, but it also brought him to the attention of territorial officials who were trying to establish formal policies for dealing with Indigenous peoples. They asked him to serve as an official interpreter and negotiator, a position that would give him significant influence over the future of the region. Samuel accepted the position, knowing it would allow him to advocate for fair treatment of the Blackfoot people while also helping white settlers avoid unnecessary conflicts. His first major assignment was to help negotiate a formal treaty that would establish permanent boundaries and trading relationships. The treaty negotiations were complex and sometimes heated, but Samuel's presence helped keep the discussions productive. Both sides trusted him to translate not just words but also cultural concepts and emotional meanings that might otherwise be misunderstood. His efforts helped create one of the first truly fair treaties between white authorities and Indigenous peoples in the territory. As winter approached, Samuel reflected on the incredible journey that had started with finding an injured girl by a creek. His simple act of compassion had grown into something much larger, a model for how different peoples could live together with mutual respect and cooperation. Ayana had recovered completely from her injuries, and the scar on her forehead had faded to a thin line. She had grown into a confident young woman who spoke fluent English and served as an ambassador for her people. She often told Samuel that he had saved much more than just her life. He had helped save the possibility of peace between their peoples. On the anniversary of the morning, when he had stepped out of his barn to find 100 warriors waiting for him, Samuel hosted a celebration that brought together people from both communities. They shared food, stories, and laughter as they commemorated the friendship that had changed all their lives. Chief Running Bear spoke at the celebration, reminding everyone that peace required constant effort and goodwill from all sides. He praised Samuel for showing that one person's kindness could ripple outward to affect entire communities. The chief's words were translated into English by Ayana, who added her own thoughts about the importance of looking beyond differences to find shared humanity. As Samuel looked around at the mixed crowd of white settlers and Blackfoot people sharing a meal together, he felt proud of what they had accomplished. The challenges weren't over. There would always be people on both sides who preferred conflict to cooperation. But they had proven that a different way was possible. His small farm had become a symbol of hope in a time and place where hope was often in short supply. And it all started because one man chose to help a stranger in need, without thinking about the color of her skin or the consequences to himself. Sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the simplest acts of human kindness.